So now we move to a story that highlights the cancer in the American political system. There's a report out this week that explains how the NRA has become wildly more successful and rich after the Sandy Hook massacre. Quote, according to recently released financial documents, the NRA grossed almost $348 million in revenue in 2013, up close to $92 million from the group's 2012 revenue of $256 million. In the first year following one of the deadliest shootings in U.S. history, the organization's contributions and grants increased by $10 million, and program service revenue shot up by $68 million from the year prior. They continue. They also increased lobbying by $10 million and paid $14.5 million to a public relations agency to make themselves look better. Also, in the first 18 days after the Sandy Hook massacre, the NRA gained more than 100,000 new members. Firearm sales also soared in the weeks after the shooting. So, stop and think about this. They became more powerful after the shooting, and they have more control of politics in America after the shooting. And of course, what have they done with that power? They've used it incredibly irresponsibly to block any and all legislation that cuts into their profits and does even moderate gun reform. You have to recall the debate that happened after the Sandy Hook massacre. There was a brief window there where everybody was outraged and everybody was on the side of gun reform. And what were the different proposals? Well, the Democrats started out by saying, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to do a 100% universal background check for all gun purchases and close the gun show loophole. That's thing number one. Thing number two is we ban high-capacity magazines. And thing number three is we ban assault weapons. So that was the strongest Democratic proposal. Those three things right there. Now, you know what happened? It was about, a week or 2 weeks into the debate where the Democrats folded like a cheap lawn chair on that, and they said, okay, you got us. No more assault weapons ban. Let's just do a high-capacity magazine ban and the universal background check. Then what happened? Again, a few weeks after that, the Democrats folded like a cheap lawn chair again. Why? Because they're pathetic and they don't know how to make an argument. And then all of a sudden, it became, instead of those three policy priorities, it just became universal background check. That's it. That's all we're asking for. Who the fuck can be against that? And by the way, when you look at the polling data, that's true. Who the fuck can be against that? Nobody, because 91% in a poll at the time, directly after the shooting, said, yeah, universal background check, of course. You need to make sure people aren't crazy and they're not, 4-time former felons. You don't want to give guns to crazy people like that, or we're going to use it. People who are schizophrenic or whatever, you can't do it. You can't do it. Well, guess what? The Republicans blocked that too. They defeated that too. And then the Democrats still folded again and said, okay. Not a universal background check. Let's do this watered-down pseudo-background check with 1 trillion loopholes, but at least we can say we did some gun reform so we don't look like the most irresponsible group of idiots in the world after this massacre when the world is watching us waiting for our government to do something. What happened? Not only did the Republicans filibuster it and defeat it, they bragged after they did it. They bragged that they were against 91% of the American people. And what did the Democrats do? Since they're pathetic losers, they didn't know how to formulate an argument to say, look at these fascist dictators disagreeing with 91% of the country, disagreeing with the majority of their base, disagreeing with the majority of NRA members according to NRA polls. The Democrats couldn't do it. They didn't know how to do it because they're weak punk bitches. But why is it? Stop and think now. Why is it that a majority of the Republican Party was in favor of this universal background check, right? Not even just the watered-down one, the universal one. They wanted stronger legislation. So a majority of Republicans wanted that. Even a majority of NRA members wanted that. So why is it that we didn't get it? And why is it that the Republicans stood up in the opposite direction and filibustered it? Because of money in politics. Because the NRA leadership, not the members themselves, the leadership, they are the ones that give money to the politicians. Now, they're giving that money to the politicians with the understanding, specifically the Republicans, with the understanding that, hey, you guys understand, zero types of gun reform that would cut into our profits. Now you're saying, well, wait a second, Kyle, the NRA isn't necessarily for profit. They're a group and people can join and become members and yada yada. That's true. But who does the NRA leadership represent? Where do they get most of their money from? The gun manufacturers who make the guns and sell them for a profit. So this is the way it works. The gun manufacturers pay money to the NRA. The NRA pays that money to the Republican politicians. So what you really have is, through a middleman, through a medium, you have the gun manufacturers giving money to the Republican politicians. And what's the one thing a gun manufacturer wouldn't ever want you to do if he's giving you money and you're a politician and you make laws? He's only going to give you that money under the condition of don't pass any laws at all that might cut into my profits, even if it's a background check, even if it's a high-capacity magazine ban, even if it's something that's common sense that would save lives that a majority of even the members of the NRA want and Republicans want. I don't care. I don't care. Don't do it. And then what happens? Unfortunately, you have this panic response, this fear response, a visceral response from people where they go, fuck, I see all these mass shootings, so I'm going to protect myself. I'm out to get mine right now. I'm just going to make sure I don't die. So what makes me more safe, I think? Well, I'm going to get a gun to make sure that there's a crazy person. I'm strapped and I'm all set here. So they end up profiting from these massacres. When you really look at the way it works, what you have is, in the United States of America, on virtually every issue, the last group of people that should ever be making policy decisions are the ones who make those decisions. And this generalizes. So another example is banking. So who's the last group of people that you would want to make banking regulation policy? Well, obviously, the banks themselves, because what are they going to say in terms of rules? Why don't you let us do whatever the fuck we want and make money in ways that might be totally unethical? And then, by the way, if we fuck up or when we fuck up, then you come and bail us out and give us tax money with no strings attached. If the bankers crafted the policy, that's the policy that they would ask for, right? Let us do whatever we want. Even if we fuck up everything, then you still come in and give us more money. That's the exact policy that we have in the United States of America. Why? Because it's Citigroup and it's Wells Fargo and it's HSBC and it's Wall Street and the investment banks and the hedge funds. They're the ones that give money to the politicians, so the politicians do what they want. And they let them, oftentimes there are bank lobbyists who write the banking regulations. And they leave giant loopholes on purpose, obviously. So we have, the United States of America is not a democracy. The United States of America is a corporatocracy. It is an oligarchy. This is government of, by, and for the rich and of, by, and for the corporations. This is why we can't get what we want, even when it's over 90% of us that want it. And we have this horrible response. I mean, look at this, man. Look at this story. The NRA gets more powerful after a mass shooting. When the statistics show, regardless of what you feel in your gut, the statistics show that if you have a gun in your house, if you own a gun, you're much more likely to die from a gun. You're much more likely to be killed by a gun. Why? Because you have to factor in accidents and you have to factor in suicides and homicides. Obviously, most murders happen with people that you know, and if you have a gun laying around, it increases the statistical likelihood that you're going to be killed. So you might think, I'm buying a gun to protect myself, but statistically, you just made yourself much less safe. That's a fact. So we've let our gut response, essentially, rule the day as to how we react after a mass shooting, when, by the way, every other modern nation responds in the exact opposite way, in a more rational way. For example, in the 1990s in Australia, there was a mass shooting, and you know what they did? They said, fuck this. They did gun regulation right after that, and since then, there's been very few instances of mass shootings. There's a terrorist attack there recently, an Islamic terrorist recently with something that happened there, but post the situation in the 1990s, it's been very, very few and far between. And that's what the statistics show. In the U.S., 32,000 people die every year because of guns, when you factor in everything. Homicides, suicides, accidents, you name it. 32,000. There was an article the other day that was talking about how Iraq is a disaster right now because 10,000 people died in 1 year. Yeah, that's bad. That's terrible. I feel bad for them. 32,000 Americans die from guns alone. So how about us? But see, when it's an organization like the NRA, even though they're responsible for pushing policy that gets more people killed than ISIS is, we can't have the conversation about them being bad. Of course not. Because then you're viewed as fringe and you're viewed as crazy, even though, of course, they're the crazy ones who are profiting off of the massacre of children. It's absolutely insane.